The rain drummed against the depot windows like it was personally pissed off at Tuesday mornings, which honestly felt about right. I stood there nursing my second cup of coffee, hoping the caffeine might trick my brain into thinking I was ready for whatever garbage the day had planned for me. Uma's office door opened with that familiar squeak that always made my shoulders tense up. She walked out holding a clipboard, scanning the room until her eyes landed on me. Great. Just great. "Robinson," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant I was about to get the assignment nobody else wanted. "Got one for you." I set down my coffee and walked over, trying to look eager instead of like I wanted to crawl back into bed. Uma handed me the disconnect order, and I glanced at the address. Someplace way out in the middle of nowhere that I'd never heard of. "Fletcher property," Uma said, though I could see that much from the paperwork. 3 months delinquent. Owner's name is Lee Fletcher. Something about the way she said it made me look up. Uma had this weird expression on her face, like she was chewing on something that tasted off. In 4 years of working here, I'd learned to read her moods pretty well, and this wasn't her usual go make this deadbeat pay-up energy. "Everything okay with this one?" I asked, hoping I sounded casual instead of nervous. "It's just—" She paused, which was weird. Uma never paused. She was one of those people who had her next 3 sentences planned before she finished the first one. "It's way out in the sticks. Real isolated. Take your time getting there. Make sure you're careful on those back roads." Take my time. Uma telling someone to take their time was like a vampire recommending sunbathing. But I just nodded and tried to look professional while my brain started spinning up all the ways this could go wrong. "Sure thing. Any issues with the property I should know about?" Uma shook her head, but there was still something off about her expression. "Nothing specific. Just, you know how these rural disconnects can go? People get territorial." Yeah, I definitely knew how they could go. Last month I'd had some guy threaten to sick his pit bull on me because I was trespassing on sovereign citizen property. The month before that, a woman had thrown a coffee mug at my head while screaming about government overreach. My confidence in this job had been circling the drain like bathwater lately. I walked back to my desk to grab my gear, and Mike from the meter department leaned over from his cubicle. "Fletcher place, huh?" he said, apparently having overheard Uma. "Heard some weird stuff about that guy." "What kind of weird stuff?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Mike shrugged. "Just rumors. Someone said he moved out there after a nasty divorce, trying to get away from his ex-wife or something. Real hermit type. Doesn't come into town much." Perfect. A bitter divorced guy living alone in the middle of nowhere, probably armed and definitely not happy about losing his electricity. This day was shaping up to be absolutely stellar. I loaded my truck with the usual equipment: clipboard, safety gear, camera for documenting the disconnect. The rain had picked up, turning the depot parking lot into a small lake that splashed cold water up my legs as I walked. My steel-toed boots were already soaked, and I hadn't even left yet. The drive started normal enough, main roads through town, then county routes that got progressively narrower and more pothole-filled. But as I got deeper into the Pennsylvania woods, civilization started disappearing in my rearview mirror. The houses got farther apart, then disappeared entirely. The GPS on my phone kept losing signal, forcing me to pull over twice to wait for it to reconnect and figure out where the hell I was. By the time I found the right road, I was starting to wonder if I'd accidentally driven into some horror movie. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches hanging low enough to scrape the roof of my truck. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to something that was basically just mud with delusions of grandeur. When I finally spotted the driveway, it was marked by a mailbox that looked like it had lost a fight with a baseball bat. The driveway itself was more like a suggestion: 2 tire ruts separated by a strip of weeds, disappearing into the trees. I sat there for a minute, engine idling, staring down that muddy track toward whatever was waiting for me. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the truck roof like it was trying to tell me something. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, drive back to town, and tell Uma the place was abandoned. But I needed this job. I needed Uma to think I was reliable, competent, not some nervous rookie who couldn't handle a simple disconnect. And really, what was the worst that could happen? Some cranky hermit would yell at me for a few minutes, I'd flip the breaker, and then I'd drive home with another successfully completed assignment under my belt. I put the truck in drive and started down the driveway. The house, when it finally came into view through the trees, looked like it was giving up on life. The front porch sagged like a tired old man, and the landscaping had gone completely wild. Bushes growing into the windows, vines crawling up the siding. The whole place had that abandoned feel, like maybe nobody had lived there in months. I parked the truck and sat there for another moment, gathering what was left of my courage while rain pelted the windshield. The house stared back at me through dark windows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly the kind of place where bad things happened to people who were just trying to do their jobs. But Uma was counting on me. The company was counting on me. And if I couldn't handle something as basic as a disconnect order, what did that say about the kind of man I was? I grabbed my clipboard and reached for the door handle, telling myself this was just another day at work. I opened the truck door and stepped out into the rain, instantly regretting it as cold water soaked through my uniform shirt. The beer cans scattered across the front porch crunched under my boots as I approached the door, and I noticed an old blue pickup truck parked behind the house that definitely hadn't been mentioned in the work order. Before I could even knock, the front door swung open and a woman stepped out. My brain sort of stuttered trying to process what I was looking at. She had dishwater blonde hair that looked like she'd been running her hands through it for days, and her pale blue eyes had this weird brightness that made my skin crawl. Her yellow tank top was stained with God knows what, and her jeans looked like she'd been rolling around in the mud, and she was holding a shotgun, just casually, like it was a broom or something. "Can I help you?" she asked, but her tone suggested she thought I was the one who needed help. I held up my clipboard and company ID, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Don Robinson with the electric company. I'm here about the disconnect notice for Lee Fletcher." She stared at me for a long moment, then threw back her head and laughed. Not a normal laugh. The kind of laugh that made me want to check where all the exits were. "Lee's gonna be real surprised to hear about overdue bills," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "He's been sleeping a lot lately, real heavy sleeper." "Are you Mrs. Fletcher?" I asked, though something about this whole situation felt wrong. "I'm Brenda Henry," she said, shifting the shotgun to her other hand. "Lee's girlfriend, and you're trespassing on private property." The way she said girlfriend made it sound like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I glanced at the truck again, then back at her face. Those eyes were definitely not right. "I have a work order here," I said, holding up the paperwork. "The account's 3 months past due, so I need to disconnect the electric service." Brenda's mood shifted like someone had flipped a switch. The hostility melted away and she smiled at me, but it was the kind of smile that made me think of sharks. "You know what? You seem nice," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Real polite. Not like some of these utility guys who come stomping around here thinking they own the place." She looked me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. "You want to come in for a beer? You look cold." Every single instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in the truck and drive away. This woman was clearly not stable. She was armed, and I was about as far from help as it was possible to get in Pennsylvania. But I also knew that if I came back to the depot without completing the disconnect, Uma would want to know why. I'd have to explain that I chickened out because a customer made me nervous, and then I'd probably get stuck with desk duty or worse. I needed this job. I needed Uma to think I could handle whatever she threw at me. "I appreciate the offer," I said, trying to sound professional instead of terrified. "But I just need to locate your electrical panel and complete the disconnect. It'll only take a few minutes." Brenda tilted her head, studying me like I was some kind of interesting bug she'd found. "You're not going to cause any trouble, are you? Lee doesn't like it when people cause trouble." "No trouble at all," I said. just doing my job." She stepped back and gestured for me to come inside with the barrel of the shotgun. "Well, come on in then. Panel's probably in the basement. Lucy's under the bed in the guest room if you want to meet her later." I assumed Lucy was Lee's daughter or maybe another relative staying at the house. The whole family was probably a little odd. It happened a lot with these rural properties. People got isolated, started acting weird, but they were usually harmless. I followed Brenda into the house, telling myself I just needed to find the electrical panel, flip the breaker, and get out. 5 minutes, maybe 10 at the most. How hard could it be? The inside of the house hit me like a physical wall. I'd dealt with messy customers before, but this was different. Garbage bags overflowing in every corner, dirty dishes stacked on every surface, and a smell that made me want to breathe through my mouth. Rotting food mixed with stale cigarette smoke and something else I couldn't identify but definitely didn't want to. "Don't mind the mess," Brenda said, waving the shotgun around like she was conducting an orchestra. "Lee and I had a big fight about cleaning up. He's been sulking ever since, hiding out and refusing to talk about our problems like an adult." I followed her through what used to be a living room, stepping carefully around empty beer bottles and what looked like a pizza box that had been there since the Clinton administration. She kept talking, her voice bouncing between angry and weirdly cheerful. "See, Lee inherited this place from his uncle a few months ago. Thought he could just move out here and start fresh, forget about our relationship." She laughed, that unsettling laugh again. "But you can't run away from love, you know." So I followed him. We belong together. The way she said followed him made my skin crawl. I tried to steer the conversation back to why I was here. "About that electrical panel," I said, holding up my clipboard. "If you could just point me in the right direction." But Brenda wasn't listening. She'd stopped walking and was staring at me with those two bright eyes, and I noticed she was younger than I'd first thought. Maybe late 30s, but the kind of hard living that aged you fast. "You know what your problem is?" she said, stepping closer. "You're too nice. I bet women take advantage of that, don't they? Walk all over you because you're polite and do your job and don't make waves." I backed up a step, trying to keep some distance between us and that shotgun. "I just need to complete this work order, ma'am. Won't take long." "Ma'am." She giggled, but it sounded wrong, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "You're cute. Lee never calls me ma'am. Lee barely talks to me at all anymore. Been avoiding me for days, sleeping in that back room, pretending like we don't have things to work out." The more she talked, the more something felt off about this whole situation. If they were having relationship problems, why wasn't Lee here to speak for himself? Why was she the only one dealing with utility workers? And why did the house feel so empty? "Maybe I should talk to Mr. Fletcher directly," I said. "About the account status." Brenda's mood shifted instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. The false friendliness vanished and her face went hard. "Why?" she demanded, raising the shotgun slightly. "Why do you need to talk to Lee? What did he tell you?" "Nothing," I said quickly, raising my hands. "He didn't tell me anything. I don't even know the guy. I'm just here about the electric bill." She backed me against the wall, and I could smell her unwashed hair, see the scratches on her arms where she'd been picking at her skin. The shotgun was pointing right at my chest now. "You're lying," she said. "Lee sent you, didn't he? This is all some setup to spy on me, see what I'm doing here. He probably told you I was crazy, told you I don't belong here." "No, nobody sent me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Look, here's the work order. Official company paperwork. 3 months overdue. Automatic disconnect." I held out the clipboard with shaking hands, and she snatched it away from me, scanning the papers with paranoid intensity. Her lips moved as she read, and I watched her face go through about 6 different emotions in the span of 10 seconds. 3 months, she muttered. He never said anything about bills, never mentioned money problems. She looked up at me suspiciously. "How do I know this is real? How do I know you're not just some guy with fake papers?" I pulled out my company ID badge, the one with my terrible photo that made me look like a serial killer. Don Robinson, Pennsylvania Electric. You can call the company if you want to verify. She studied the ID, then looked back at me, then at the papers again. I could practically see the gears grinding in her head, trying to make sense of information that didn't fit whatever story she'd been telling herself. Lee handles the bills, she said finally, but she sounded less certain now. He's just been distracted lately. Stressed about money, about us, about starting over. She handed the clipboard back to me but kept the shotgun raised. Fine. You want to see the electrical panel? It's probably in the basement, but I'm coming with you. I nodded, relief flooding through me. That's fine, lead the way. But as she turned toward what I assumed was the basement door, I caught her muttering under her breath. Lee's gonna be real surprised about this bill. Real surprised. The way she said it made me think that maybe Lee Fletcher was going to be surprised about more than just an overdue electric bill. Basement's this way, Brenda said, gesturing toward a door with peeling paint that I hadn't noticed before. She kept the shotgun pointed casually in my direction as she led me through the cluttered kitchen. The door opened with a groan that sounded like something out of a horror movie, revealing wooden stairs that disappeared into darkness below. A musty smell drifted up from the basement, mixing with the general funk of the house to create something that made my eyes water. After you, I said, hoping she'd go first so I could keep an eye on that shotgun. But Brenda just smiled that unsettling smile and shook her head. Oh no, I need to watch you work. Make sure you don't break anything that belongs to Lee and me. I pulled out my flashlight and started down the creaky stairs, each step announcing my presence to whatever was waiting in the dark below. Brenda followed close behind, close enough that I could hear her breathing and feel the presence of that gun barrel somewhere behind my head. The basement was exactly what I'd expected from the rest of the house, a disaster zone of forgotten junk and broken dreams. Old furniture sat stacked against the walls, including a couch with stuffing spilling out of torn cushions and a dining room table missing 2 legs. Broken appliances were scattered around like a graveyard of washing machines and water heaters, and cardboard boxes towered in precarious stacks that looked ready to topple over if someone sneezed. But it was the children's toys that really threw me. Scattered between the adult debris were kids' things. A pink bicycle with training wheels, some action figures still in their packaging, a dollhouse with its roof caved in. They seemed completely out of place in what was supposed to be a bachelor's basement, like artifacts from some other family's life. Lee's got nieces and nephews, Brenda explained, noticing my confusion. They used to visit sometimes before we got together. Kids leave stuff everywhere, you know? I nodded and swept my flashlight across the far wall, looking for the electrical panel. There it is, I said, spotting the gray metal box behind a stack of moldy cardboard boxes. You better not make a mess, Brenda warned from her position on the stairs. Lee gets real upset when people disturb his uncle's things. I started moving boxes carefully, trying not to disturb more than necessary while Brenda kept up her constant chatter. Her voice echoed weirdly in the basement, bouncing off the concrete walls and making everything she said sound more ominous than it probably was. See, Lee thought he could just run away from our problems, she said, shifting the shotgun from hand to hand. Packed up his stuff one day and moved out here like he could escape what we have together. But love doesn't work that way, you know? You can't just decide to stop loving someone because it's convenient. I found the main breaker panel and opened the metal door, revealing rows of switches and circuit breakers. Standard residential setup, nothing complicated about shutting off the main power. I pulled out my camera to document the disconnection before I started. He tried to call the police on me at first, Brenda continued, and something in her tone made my skin crawl. Can you believe that? Calling the cops on someone who loves you. But I helped him see reason, explained how we belong together, how running away just makes everything harder. The camera flash reflected off the metal panel as I took my documentation photos. I tried to focus on the technical work while Brenda's voice continued behind me, but her words were getting harder to ignore. Lee's got trust issues, she said, moving down a few steps to get closer. Men always do when they've been hurt before. His ex-wife really did a number on him, made him think all women are out to get him. But I'm different. I'm patient. I'll wait as long as it takes for him to realize we're meant to be together. I located the main breaker and reached for it, trying to block out the growing unease in my stomach. Something about the way Brenda talked about Lee bothered me, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. And why wasn't Lee here to speak for himself about his own electric bill? My flashlight slipped from under my arm as I worked on the breaker, hitting the concrete floor with a loud clatter that echoed through the basement like a gunshot. "What the hell are you doing?" Brenda exploded, her voice jumping about 3 octaves. She stormed down the rest of the stairs, shotgun raised and pointed directly at my chest. "I told you not to make a mess. This is Lee's house, not some construction site where you can throw things around." I raised my hands, dropping my tools in the process. I'm sorry, it just slipped. I'll pick it up." "Don't you dare move!" she screamed, close enough now that I could see the wild look in her eyes, the way her hands shook as she gripped the weapon. "You think you can just come in here and disrespect our home? Throw things around like you own the place?" "I didn't mean to drop it," I said, keeping my voice as calm and quiet as possible. "It was an accident. I just want to finish this job and get out of your hair so you and Lee can work things out." Something about mentioning Lee seemed to calm her down a little. The shotgun lowered slightly, though she kept it pointed in my general direction. "Lee doesn't like loud noises," she said, her voice returning to that weird sing-song tone. "He's been real sensitive lately, jumping at everything. I keep telling him he needs to relax, that nobody's going to hurt him as long as I'm here to protect him." I bent down slowly to pick up my flashlight, watching her face for any sign that she was about to flip out again. "I understand. I'll be real quiet from here on out." "Good," she said, backing up a step but keeping the gun trained on me. "Finish whatever you're doing and then we'll go upstairs. I want you to meet Lucy properly before you leave. She's been so patient, waiting to say hello." I flipped the main breaker, plunging the basement into darkness except for my flashlight beam. The house was officially disconnected from the power grid. My job was done, and all I wanted was to get out of this place as quickly as possible. "All finished," I said, closing the panel door and gathering my equipment. "Power's disconnected as requested." Brenda smiled that disturbing smile again and gestured toward the stairs with the shotgun barrel. "Perfect. Now come on upstairs and meet Lucy. She's been dying to see you." I followed Brenda back upstairs, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run while I still could. But I was already here. The job was done, and all I had to do was meet this Lucy person and get out. How bad could it be? "She's right in here," Brenda said, pushing open a door at the end of the hallway. The smell hit me like a punch to the face, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach lurch. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, trying not to gag. The guest room looked like a bomb had gone off. Clothes covered every surface. Empty food containers were stacked in corners, and garbage bags sat torn open with their contents spilling across the floor. The single window was covered with a blanket, blocking out most of the daylight and creating an oppressive gloom that my eyes struggled to adjust to. "Lucy, honey, we have a visitor," Brenda cooed, pointing toward the far corner of the room with her shotgun barrel. I squinted through the dim light and saw movement under the bed, a large German shepherd with golden fur, panting heavily in the stifling air. The dog looked up at us with tired eyes, but didn't move from her spot. "Oh," I said, relief flooding through me so fast it made me dizzy. "A dog. She's beautiful." For a moment, I felt stupid for being so paranoid. Of course, Lucy was a dog. Rural people loved their animals, talked about them like family members. I'd been letting Brenda's weird behavior get into my head when really she was just an eccentric woman with relationship problems and poor housekeeping skills. "She's been such a good girl," Brenda said, her voice taking on that sing-song quality again. "So patient, keeping Lee company while he's been sleeping." I started backing toward the door, eager to wrap this up. Well, she seems really sweet. I should probably get going, though. Lots more calls to make today. But as I turned to leave, my eyes caught something in the corner that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. A human foot was sticking out from under a pile of dirty blankets. Pale, waxy skin with an unnatural bluish tinge that I'd only seen in movies. The angle was all wrong, too, twisted in a way that living feet don't twist. The smell suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. I tried to keep my face neutral, tried to act like I hadn't seen anything, but I felt my expression collapse anyway. My mouth fell open and I took an involuntary step backward, right into Brenda. "What's wrong?" she asked, but her tone had changed completely. The fake sweetness was gone, replaced by something cold and sharp. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced myself to meet her eyes, tried to smile. "Nothing, just the smell in here is pretty strong. Maybe you should open a window." But Brenda wasn't buying it. She followed my gaze to the corner where the foot was visible, and when she looked back at me, her face had transformed into something predatory. "You saw him, didn't you?" she said quietly, raising the shotgun until it was pointed directly at my chest. "I told you Lee was sleeping. I told you he was a heavy sleeper. But you had to go and look, didn't you?" My hands went up automatically, clipboard falling to the floor. "I didn't see anything. I just want to leave." "You can't leave now," Brenda said, backing toward the door to block my exit. "Not when you know our business. Lee wouldn't like that. He's very private." The room felt like it was shrinking around me. The dog whimpered from under the bed, and I realized she was probably dehydrated, maybe starving. How long had she been trapped in here with? "Look, I won't tell anyone anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was never here. I'll just go back and tell my supervisor the house was empty. Nobody answered the door." But Brenda was shaking her head, that wild look back in her eyes. No, you don't understand. This is all wrong. You weren't supposed to see this. Lee and I had everything worked out, and now you're going to ruin everything." She started raising the shotgun higher, and I saw her finger move toward the trigger. Time slowed down to individual heartbeats as my brain finally caught up to what was happening. This woman had killed Lee Fletcher. She'd been living in this house with his corpse, talking about him like he was still alive, and now she was going to kill me too. I didn't think. I just moved. I lunged forward and shoved Brenda as hard as I could, sending her stumbling backward into the hallway. She screamed something I couldn't understand as I bolted past her, running for the front door like my life depended on it. Because it did. "Get back here," she shrieked behind me. "You don't understand. You're ruining everything." I hit the front door at full speed, my boots slipping on the beer cans scattered across the porch as I ran for my truck. The keys were still in my pocket. Please let the keys still be in my pocket. And I fumbled for them as I heard the front door slam open behind me. The shotgun blast was louder than anything I'd ever heard, a thunderclap that made my ears ring and sent pellets spraying into the mud just behind my feet. I dove into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The engine turned over on the second try, and I threw the truck into reverse, spinning the tires in the muddy driveway as another blast shattered the back window. Glass rained down on my shoulders as I whipped the truck around and floored the accelerator, fishtailing down the narrow drive toward the main road. In my rearview mirror, I could see Brenda standing on the front porch in her stained tank top, shotgun in hand, screaming words I couldn't hear over the roar of my engine and the pounding of blood in my ears. I didn't slow down until the house disappeared completely behind the trees. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking long enough to dial 911. Every time I tried to hit the numbers, my finger would slip or I'd punch the wrong button, and I'd have to start over. The adrenaline was making everything feel disconnected, like I was watching someone else's hands try to work my phone. I'd made it maybe 4 miles down the county road before I spotted the gas station, one of those old places with 2 pumps and a hand-painted sign that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a minute, engine running, trying to get my breathing under control while cold air whistled through the hole where my back window used to be. Glass crunched under my boots as I got out of the truck. The whole back windshield was gone, blown out by Brenda's shotgun blast, and little cubes of safety glass covered my seat and the truck bed. I picked a few pieces out of my hair and tried not to think about how close those pellets had come to my head. The phone finally cooperated on my fourth attempt. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report a dead body, I said, and my voice cracked like I was 13 again, and a woman with a gun who tried to kill me. Sir, I need you to slow down. Can you tell me your location? I looked around for a street sign or address marker but couldn't find anything useful. I'm at a gas station on, I don't know the road name. It's maybe 4 miles from 1247 Timber Ridge Road. That's where the body is. Sir, you said there's a dead body? Are you sure the person is deceased? Yeah, I'm sure. The image of that pale foot flashed through my mind again. The wrong angle, the bluish skin. There's a woman there named Brenda Henry. She's got a shotgun and she's completely insane. She shot at me when I tried to leave. Are you injured? No, but she blew out my truck window. Look, you need to send someone out there right away. This woman is dangerous. The dispatcher kept asking me to repeat things, spell names, confirm addresses. I gave her my callback number and told her I'd wait at the gas station for police to arrive. The whole conversation felt surreal, like I was reading lines from a script instead of reporting an actual murder. After I hung up, I sat in my truck staring at my phone, trying to work up the nerve to call Uma. I needed to report what happened, but something about her reaction this morning bothered me. The way she'd looked when she handed me the Fletcher assignment, like she was sending me to do something unpleasant that needed to be done. The weird instruction to take my time getting there. I dialed the depot number. Pennsylvania Electric, this is Uma. Uma, it's Don Robinson. I'm calling about the Fletcher property. Robinson? You finished already? That was fast. I finished, but we have a problem. A big problem. I took a breath and tried to organize my thoughts. There's a dead body in the house, Uma, and the woman there tried to kill me. Silence on the other end for maybe 10 seconds. Then, what do you mean, tried to kill you? I mean, she had a shotgun and she shot at me when I tried to leave, blew out my back window. I barely got out of there alive. Did you complete the disconnection? The question hit me like a slap. Did I complete the disconnection? Uma, there's a dead guy in that house. I heard you. I'm asking if you finished the job before this situation developed. I stared at the phone, not quite believing what I was hearing. Yeah, I flipped the breaker. The power's off. But that's not really the point here. Good. That's good. Now, did you do anything to provoke this woman? Say something that might have set her off. Provoke her? She was holding a shotgun when she answered the door. The whole place reeked like something died, which apparently something did. I didn't provoke anything. I'm just trying to understand what happened, Robinson. These rural people can be territorial, and if they think you're being aggressive or disrespectful... Uma, listen to me. This wasn't about territory or disrespect. This woman is mentally ill. She's been living in that house with a corpse, talking about the dead guy like he's still alive. She tried to murder me when I saw the body. Another pause. Have you called the police? Of course I called the police. They're on their way. Okay, good. Now when you talk to them, I need you to be very clear that you were there in an official capacity, conducting legitimate company business. We can't have any suggestion that you were trespassing or exceeding your authority. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What are you talking about? I'm talking about liability, Robinson. If this situation turns into a lawsuit, we need to make sure the company is protected. You were following proper procedures, you had a valid work order, and any confrontation was initiated by the property owner. The property owner is dead, Uma. You don't know that for certain. You saw something that looked like a body, but you're not a medical examiner. For all we know, it could have been a mannequin or Halloween decoration. These rural types have strange ideas about humor. I couldn't speak for a moment. She was actually trying to suggest I might have imagined the whole thing. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a human foot. and it was definitely attached to a dead person. Well, that's for the police to determine. The important thing is that you completed your assignment and followed company protocol. I'll need you to file a full incident report when you get back. When I get back? I'm not coming back today. I need to talk to the police, probably give a statement. How long is that going to take? I don't know, Uma. However long it takes. Because you've got 3 more disconnects scheduled for this afternoon. I can't just cancel those because you had an unpleasant encounter with a customer. I held the phone away from my ear and stared at it. An unpleasant encounter with a customer. That's what she was calling this. I'm not doing any more calls today, I said finally. I'm going to talk to the police and then I'm going home. Robinson, I understand you're shaken up, but you can't let one bad experience affect your work performance. These things happen in field service. You deal with it and move on. These things happen. Uma, when was the last time one of our guys found a dead body on a service call? That's not the point. The point is that you have a job to do, and part of that job is handling difficult situations professionally. If you can't do that... She didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was clear enough. I was about to respond when I saw a police cruiser turn into the gas station parking lot, blue lights flashing. The police are here, I said. I have to go. Call me when you're finished there. We need to discuss how to handle this situation going forward. I hung up without answering and walked over to meet the cop as he got out of his car. He was a big guy, maybe late 40s, with graying hair and the kind of calm presence that immediately made me feel safer. His uniform was crisp and professional, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd seen just about everything. You the fellow who called in the disturbance? He asked, extending his hand. I'm Officer Howard. Don Robinson. Yeah, I called it in. I shook his hand, grateful for the steady way he looked at me, like he was taking this seriously. I was doing a service call and walked into something really bad. Why don't you tell me what happened, step by step? Take your time. So I did. I told him about the disconnect order, the isolated property, Brenda answering the door with a shotgun. I described the condition of the house, the conversation about Lee sleeping heavily, the smell in the guest room, and finally seeing that pale foot sticking out from under the blankets. Officer Howard listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small pad he pulled from his shirt pocket. When I got to the part about running for my truck and Brenda shooting at me, he walked around to look at my shattered back window. She got close, he said, examining the glass pattern. You're lucky she wasn't a better shot. She seemed pretty comfortable with that gun. He nodded and closed his notepad. Mr. Robinson, I need to ask you something, and I want you to give me an honest answer. Is there any chance you misinterpreted what you saw in that room? I thought about Uma's suggestion that it might have been a mannequin, and something angry flared in my chest. Officer Howard, I know what a dead body looks like. I've seen them before. That was a human foot, and whoever it belonged to has been dead for a while. Okay. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. I believe you. And based on what you've told me, we're going to treat this as a potential homicide scene. I'm calling for backup and a detective, and we're going to take a very careful look at that property. The relief I felt was overwhelming. Here was someone who actually listened to what I was saying and took it seriously, instead of trying to minimize it or make it my fault. What happens now? I asked. Now you're going to follow me back toward that property, but you're going to stop well short of the house and wait while we secure the scene. After that, a detective will want to take a formal statement, probably at the station. This is going to take a while. I nodded, already dreading another trip back toward that house. But at least this time I wouldn't be going alone. The convoy of police cars looked like something out of a movie as we headed back toward the Fletcher property. I followed behind Officer Howard's cruiser in my truck, cold air whistling through the hole where my back window used to be, trying not to think about how close I'd come to being the second body in that house. Howard had insisted I could wait at the station, but I needed to see this through. After everything I'd been through, sitting in some waiting room while other people dealt with the aftermath felt wrong. Plus, they'd need me to show them exactly where I'd seen the body. Howard's voice crackled through the radio he'd given me. "Mr. Robinson, I want to fill you in on some background while we drive. The woman you encountered, Brenda Henry, she's been missing for 3 weeks. Missing from where? State mental health facility down in Harrisburg. She was being held on stalking and assault charges, waiting for a competency evaluation. Somehow she managed to walk away during a supervised outdoor activity. I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. 3 weeks? And nobody thought to warn people in the area? That's a question I'll be asking some administrators tomorrow, Howard said, and I could hear the anger in his voice. Apparently, they thought she might return voluntarily and didn't want to create unnecessary panic. The trees pressed in on both sides as we turned onto the narrower county road. In daylight, with police cars ahead and behind me, the route didn't seem nearly as threatening as it had this morning. But knowing what waited at the end made my stomach churn anyway. "How do you know she was targeting Lee Fletcher specifically?" I asked. She'd been sending him letters for months. Started last spring after they met during her brief stay at the county hospital. He was there for some minor surgery. She was there after a suicide attempt. She apparently decided he was her soulmate based on one conversation in the waiting room. Jesus. Fletcher did everything right, Howard continued. He reported the letters to local police, got a restraining order, even moved out here thinking distance would solve the problem. But somehow she tracked him down anyway. We were getting close now. I could see the broken mailbox coming up on the right, the same one that had looked like it had been beaten with a baseball bat. Today it looked even more ominous, knowing what it had been marking. "How bad are her previous charges?" I asked. "Bad enough." The assault charge was for attacking a male nurse at the facility with a scalpel she'd stolen from a supply cart. The stalking charge involves a different man, a social worker she'd become obsessed with. She broke into his apartment and was waiting for him in his bedroom when he came home from work. The convoy slowed as we approached the driveway. Through my windshield, I could see the same muddy tire ruts disappearing into the trees. But something was different. The blue pickup truck that had been parked behind the house was gone. "She's not here," I said into the radio. "Her truck's gone." "Copy that. All units, suspect vehicle is not on scene. Maintain caution." Howard's cruiser stopped at the mouth of the driveway, and he got out to walk back to my truck. His face was grim as he leaned down to my window. "I want you to stay right here while we clear the house," he said. "If she comes back while we're inside, I need you to lay on your horn and get on the radio immediately." "You think she'd come back?" "People like Brenda don't think logically. She might have left something behind, or she might want to clean up evidence. Either way, I'm not taking chances with your safety." I watched through my cracked windshield as the officers spread out around the property. They moved with professional precision. Nothing like the reckless way I'd approached the house this morning. 2 officers took position behind trees on either side of the front porch, while Howard and another cop approached the front door with their weapons drawn. The front door was standing wide open, just like I'd left it when I ran. But the house felt different now, empty in a way it hadn't this morning. Even from a distance, I could tell Brenda was gone. That's when I saw Lucy. The German shepherd appeared in the doorway, tail wagging tentatively as she looked at the officers. She was moving slowly, like every step took effort, but she was alive. When Howard held out his hand, she came down the porch steps and went straight to him, pressing her nose against his palm. "Poor girl," I heard him say. "How long have you been trapped in there?" One of the other officers produced a water bottle and poured it into his cupped hands. Lucy lapped it up desperately, tail wagging harder now. Watching her drink made me realize how close she'd come to dying too. If I hadn't shown up today, if nobody had discovered what happened to Lee, she would have slowly starved to death in that horrible room. Howard spoke into his radio. "House appears empty. We have 1 dog, appears to be in good condition but dehydrated. Beginning interior sweep now." It took them almost 20 minutes to clear the entire house. I sat in my truck with the engine running, watching officers move past windows and listening to their radio chatter. The crime scene team had arrived and was setting up equipment in the front yard, preparing to process what they found inside. Finally, Howard emerged from the house and walked over to my truck. His expression was somber, but not surprised. "It's confirmed," he said. "Mr. Fletcher is deceased. Appears to have been dead for several days based on the condition of the remains. We'll need the coroner to determine exact cause of death, but there are obvious signs of trauma." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Even though I'd known what they'd find, hearing it officially confirmed made everything feel more real somehow. "Did she take anything when she left?" I asked. "Hard to say. The whole place is such a mess that it's difficult to tell what's missing. But she definitely cleared out in a hurry after you left. Looks like she grabbed some clothes and whatever money she could find. Any idea where she might have gone?" Howard shook his head. "Could be anywhere by now. We've got alerts out to all surrounding counties, and the state police are coordinating with neighboring states. But she's had several hours head start, and she knows we're looking for her now." I thought about Brenda standing on that porch with her shotgun, screaming as I drove away. She'd seemed completely unhinged, but apparently she'd been coherent enough to realize her time at the house was over once someone had seen Lee's body. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we process the scene, gather evidence, and work on tracking her down. The FBI will probably get involved since she crossed state lines when she escaped from the facility. As for you, you're going to need to give a formal statement, probably tomorrow morning when things settle down." Lucy had found a patch of grass near the driveway and was lying down, still panting, but looking more comfortable. One of the crime scene technicians had given her some food from a sandwich, and she was eating with the careful attention of an animal that hadn't seen a meal in days. "She'll be okay," Howard said, following my gaze. "Animal control is sending someone to pick her up. They'll make sure she gets checked out by a vet and then work on finding her a good home. At least one good thing would come out of this nightmare. Lucy would survive, and with any luck, she'd end up with people who would take better care of her than Lee had been able to." "Officer Howard," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How often do things like this happen? I mean, do you get a lot of calls about people finding dead bodies on service calls?" He was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "In 23 years of police work, I've never had a case quite like this one. But what really bothers me is how preventable it was. If the mental health facility had followed proper procedures when she escaped, if they'd notified local law enforcement immediately instead of hoping she'd come back on their own, Lee Fletcher might still be alive. And I never would have walked into that house. Exactly. This whole situation is the result of multiple system failures. People not doing their jobs, institutions covering their asses instead of protecting the public." He looked at me seriously. "You did good work today, Mr. Robinson. You kept your head in a dangerous situation and potentially saved other lives by reporting what you found." I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was wound so tight. After Uma's reaction on the phone, after her suggestion that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, Howard's words meant more than he probably knew. The sun was starting to set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the property. Crime scene technicians were setting up floodlights to continue working after dark, turning the Fletcher house into a bright island in the growing gloom of the Pennsylvania woods. Somewhere out there, Brenda Henry was driving through that same darkness, probably planning her next move, looking for another isolated house, another vulnerable person to target. The thought made me sick. But at least now people were looking for her. At least now someone was taking the threat seriously. The floodlights turned the Fletcher property into something from a crime scene TV show, bright white beams cutting through the darkness and making the whole place look even more surreal than it had this morning. I sat in my truck watching technicians move in and out of the house, carrying evidence bags and camera equipment, while Lucy dozed on a blanket someone had spread for her near the porch steps. Howard walked over and leaned against my truck door, looking tired but focused. "Getting cold out here. You sure you don't want to head home?" We'll have plenty more questions tomorrow. I'm okay, I said, though the truth was I couldn't quite bring myself to leave yet. Maybe I needed to see this through, see justice actually happening, instead of just hoping it would. Well, I got some information back from state police that you should probably hear. Howard pulled out his notepad and flipped to a page covered in his careful handwriting. Lee Fletcher called 911 twice in the past 3 weeks, both times reporting that someone was watching his house, following him when he went into town. My stomach dropped. He knew she was here. Not only that, he gave them a description that matches Brenda Henry perfectly, even mentioned she'd been sending him letters, and that he had a restraining order against her. So what happened when police responded? Howard's jaw tightened. First time, the responding officer drove out here, looked around, didn't see anyone. Second time, different officer, same result. Both times they filed reports saying no evidence of trespassing or harassment. I thought about that isolated house, how easy it would be for someone to hide in the woods and watch without being spotted. Did they follow up at all? That's where it gets worse. After the second call, Lee apparently told the responding officer he didn't want any more police visits because he was worried they might make the situation worse. The officer took that to mean Lee was handling things himself. But he wasn't handling anything. He was probably too scared to call again. Exactly. And 3 days after that second call, Lee stopped answering his phone when police called to check on him. They assumed he wanted to be left alone. I leaned back against my headrest and closed my eyes. Lee Fletcher had done everything right. Reported the stalking, got a restraining order, moved away, called police when she found him anyway. And the system had failed him completely at every single step. There's more, Howard said. I talked to the administrator at the mental health facility about Brenda's escape. Want to guess how long they waited before notifying law enforcement? How long? 14 days. 2 weeks. They claimed they thought she might return voluntarily and didn't want to, quote-unquote, criminalize her mental health crisis. The anger that hit me was so sudden and intense it made my hands shake. 14 days. She'd already been here for 2 weeks when Lee made those calls. She probably killed him within a few days of arriving, which means she'd been living with his body for over a week when you showed up this morning. The thought made me sick. All those times Brenda had talked about Lee like he was alive, like he was just sleeping in the back room or being moody about their relationship. She'd been having conversations with a corpse. Howard continued reading from his notes. The facility administrator I spoke with kept emphasizing that Brenda had never been violent towards staff during her stay, despite the assault charges that got her committed. Apparently she was a model patient who attended group therapy and took her medications without complaint. Right up until she escaped. Right up until she escaped during what they call a supervised nature walk. Somehow she just wandered away from the group and nobody noticed for 3 hours. Headlights swept across the driveway as another vehicle approached. I expected another police car or maybe the coroner's van, but instead I saw a white sedan with the Pennsylvania Electric logo on the door. My stomach clenched as Uma got out and started walking toward the crime scene tape. "That's my supervisor," I told Howard. He looked surprised. "She drove all the way out here? Must be quite a supervisor." I watched Uma approach one of the officers working the perimeter. She was wearing her company blazer over the same clothes she'd had on this morning, and her usually perfect hair looked disheveled like she'd been running her hands through it. The officer pointed toward where Howard and I were standing, and she started walking in our direction. "Mr. Robinson," she called out while still 20 feet away. "Thank goodness you're all right. I've been worried sick since your call." Howard straightened up and extended his hand as she reached us. "Officer Bentley Howard, you must be Mrs. Anderson." Uma shook his hand, but something passed between them that I couldn't quite read. Not exactly recognition, but not the wariness of complete strangers either. "I came as soon as I could get away from the office," Uma said, though she was looking at Howard instead of me. "This is just terrible. Poor Don walked into an unimaginable situation." "Yes, he did," Howard replied evenly, though it's fortunate he was there when he was. Might have been much worse if this had gone undiscovered for longer. Uma nodded, but her attention kept drifting to the crime scene activity behind us. I suppose we'll need to discuss liability issues, given that this happened during company business. Liability? Howard's voice cooled several degrees. Mr. Robinson was the victim of an assault, Mrs. Anderson. He was doing his job when he encountered a dangerous fugitive. Of course. I just meant that we'll need to coordinate with our insurance company, make sure Don gets any medical attention he needs. Uma looked at me for the first time since arriving. You should probably see a doctor about the shock. Something like this can have delayed effects. I was about to respond when another officer approached Howard and said something quietly in his ear. Howard nodded and turned back to us. Mrs. Anderson, I'll need to speak with you privately for a few minutes. Some questions about company procedures and Mr. Robinson's assignment today. Certainly, though I'm not sure how much help I can be. They walked about 30 feet away, close enough that I could see them talking, but too far to hear specific words. What I could hear, though, was the tone of their conversation. It wasn't the careful politeness of two strangers discussing a business matter. It sounded more like Howard was asking pointed questions and Uma was giving defensive answers. I couldn't make out everything, but I caught fragments. Previous incidents at this property, and warnings from other departments, and employee safety protocols. Uma's voice got sharper as the conversation continued. I heard her say something about difficult properties and standard procedures, while Howard's responses stayed calm but firm. Then Uma said something that made my blood run cold. The Fletcher account had been flagged as potentially problematic, but we couldn't just ignore a 3-month delinquency. Flagged as potentially problematic. She'd known there might be issues at the Fletcher property and sent me there anyway. Howard asked another question I couldn't hear, and Uma's response was clearer. We thought it might be best handled by someone with Robinson's experience level. He's been asking for more challenging assignments. My hands started shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear or shock. It was rage. I'd never asked for more challenging assignments. I'd never even hinted that I wanted to deal with difficult customers or dangerous situations. If anything, I'd been hoping for easier routes. Maybe some of the commercial accounts that paid their bills on time and didn't involve driving through the middle of nowhere. But Uma was standing there telling a police officer that I'd specifically requested this kind of work, like she was trying to make it sound like I'd volunteered to walk into whatever had been waiting at the Fletcher house. Howard asked something else, and Uma glanced over at me before responding. I couldn't hear her answer, but I saw her shake her head and spread her hands in a gesture that seemed to say she'd done everything reasonably possible. They talked for another few minutes before walking back over to my truck. Uma looked relieved, like she'd successfully explained herself, but Howard's expression was unreadable. All set, Uma said brightly. Officer Howard just needed some background information for his report. Nothing to worry about. Howard looked at me carefully. Mr. Robinson, I'll need you to come in tomorrow morning to finalize your statement. Around 9 o'clock work for you? Yeah, that's fine. Good. And Mrs. Anderson, thank you for coming out. I'm sure it's reassuring for Mr. Robinson to know his employer is concerned about his welfare. The way Howard said it, I couldn't tell if he was being sincere or sarcastic, but something in his tone made Uma look uncomfortable. Of course, she said. Don's one of our best employees. We take care of our people. We take care of our people. The words rang hollow after everything I'd heard and seen today. After Uma's bizarre phone call this afternoon, where she'd seemed more concerned about liability than my safety. After learning that she'd apparently known the Fletcher property was problematic, but sent me there anyway. Uma turned to me with what was probably supposed to be a motherly smile. Don, why don't you take tomorrow off? Give yourself time to process everything that's happened. Come in Thursday morning and we'll discuss how to move forward. I'm already planning to take tomorrow off. I said. "I have to give my statement to the police." "Right, of course. Well, after that, just rest. Don't worry about anything work-related for now." She gave Howard another handshake and headed back to her car, leaving me alone with him again. We both watched her drive away before either of us spoke. "Interesting conversation," Howard said finally. "What did she tell you?" Howard was quiet for a moment, and I got the sense he was deciding how much to share. "Let's just say her version of events doesn't quite match what you told me earlier." "In what way?" "According to Mrs. Anderson, the Fletcher account had been red flagged by multiple departments due to previous incidents with service technicians. Apparently there were reports of threatening behavior, possible mental health issues, and recommendations that future service calls be handled by experienced personnel only." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She knew the account was dangerous? That's what she indicated. She also said you'd been specifically requesting more challenging assignments and that she thought you were ready for this kind of situation. The lie was so blatant, so completely contrary to reality, that I couldn't speak for a moment. I'd never requested challenging assignments. I'd never even hinted that I wanted to deal with dangerous customers. And Uma knew that because I'd complained to her multiple times about difficult rural calls. "That's not true," I said finally. "None of that is true." Howard nodded slowly. "I figured as much. Your reaction when I asked about it was pretty telling. She's lying to cover herself." "Probably. Question is, why did she send you to a property she knew was potentially dangerous?" I thought about Uma's strange behavior this morning, the way she'd looked when she handed me the Fletcher assignment, the weird instruction to take my time getting there, her flat, emotionless reaction when I called to report what had happened. "I think she wanted something bad to happen," I said, the words coming out before I'd really thought them through. Howard raised his eyebrows. "That's a serious accusation. Maybe not bad like this, but bad enough that I'd ask for a transfer to desk work or quit altogether. She's been pushing me toward indoor assignments for months, saying I'm too nervous for field work." "And you didn't want to transfer?" "I needed the field pay. Desk jobs pay less, and I can't afford a pay cut." Howard was quiet again, processing what I'd told him. Behind us, the crime scene team was starting to pack up their equipment. The house looked empty and abandoned in the harsh glare of the floodlights, like something that had been poisoned and needed to be torn down. "Mr. Robinson," Howard said eventually, "I want you to think carefully about whether you trust your employer to have your best interests at heart going forward." "I don't." "Good, because people who'll send you into dangerous situations for their own convenience aren't the kind of people you want making decisions about your safety." Lucy had woken up and was stretching beside her blanket. One of the technicians was packing up the food and water they'd given her, getting ready for animal control to arrive. At least she was going to be okay. At least someone was going to take proper care of her. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we finish processing the scene, put together a case file, and start building charges against Brenda Henry when we catch her. As for you, you go home, get some rest, and come in tomorrow to finish your statement." "And after that?" Howard looked at me seriously. "After that, you decide whether you want to keep working for people who view you as expendable." I nodded, knowing he was right but not quite ready to face what that meant. I'd worked for Pennsylvania Electric for 4 years. It was steady employment, decent benefits, a predictable paycheck. Walking away would mean starting over, and starting over terrified me almost as much as walking into that house had this morning. But at least now I knew where I stood. Uma had been willing to sacrifice my safety for whatever agenda she was pursuing, and the company she represented clearly valued profits over employee welfare. The question was what I was going to do about it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale foot sticking out from under the blankets, or heard Brenda's shotgun blast echoing through the trees. But when my alarm went off at 7:30, I felt something I hadn't expected: clarity. The police station looked like every small-town government building I'd ever seen, all beige walls and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick. Bentley was waiting for me in the lobby with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of tired eyes that said he'd been working all night. "Thanks for coming in," he said, handing me one of the cups. "Got some news you'll want to hear." "Good news or bad news?" "Good. We got her." The relief hit me so hard I had to sit down in one of the plastic lobby chairs. "When?" "Around 2 this morning. She tried to break into another house about 15 miles east of the Fletcher property. Same basic setup, isolated place, man living alone." Bentley sat down across from me, looking satisfied but grim. Difference was, this guy was ready for her. "What do you mean, ready?" "Retired state trooper. Lives alone since his wife died, but he's not exactly defenseless. Heard someone trying to jimmy his back door, called it in, then grabbed his service weapon and went to investigate." I tried to picture Brenda facing off against a trained police officer instead of an unarmed electric company worker or a guy just trying to start over in peace. "Did she fight?" "She tried to run when she saw the gun, but he kept her pinned down until backup arrived. Found her truck parked about a quarter mile away with a bag full of Lee Fletcher's belongings and some kind of journal where she'd been writing about their relationship." The air quotes Bentley made around the word relationship told me everything I needed to know about what they'd found in that journal. "So what happens now?" "Now she gets charged with first-degree murder for Lee Fletcher, plus attempted burglary, assault with a deadly weapon for what she did to you, and about 6 other charges related to her escape from the facility." Bentley leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Her mental health history will probably complicate things at trial, but it won't excuse what she did. She knew right from wrong when she killed Lee." We spent the next hour going through my statement line by line, making sure every detail was accurate for the prosecutors. Bentley recorded everything, asked clarifying questions, and had me sign about 4 different forms. The whole process felt surprisingly normal after everything that had happened, like filling out paperwork after a car accident. "That should do it," Bentley said, shutting off the recorder. "You'll probably have to testify if this goes to trial, but that won't be for months." "What about the mental health facility? Are they facing any consequences for letting her escape?" Bentley's expression darkened. "That's being investigated by the state. A lot of people asking hard questions about how someone with Brenda's history was allowed on an unsupervised nature walk. But you know how these things go. Investigations take time, and accountability is often in short supply." I thought about Lee Fletcher making those phone calls, trying to get help, being told police couldn't do anything, about the facility waiting 2 weeks to report Brenda missing, about Uma knowing the Fletcher account was flagged as dangerous and sending me there anyway. "System failures all the way down," I said. "Unfortunately, yes, but at least now she can't hurt anyone else." I drove back to the electric company feeling lighter than I had in months, despite everything that had happened. Brenda was locked up where she belonged. I'd survived something that should have killed me. And most importantly, I finally understood exactly where I stood with Pennsylvania Electric. Uma was waiting in her office when I arrived, door open like she'd been watching for my truck. She waved me over with what was probably supposed to be a concerned smile. "Don, come in, come in. How did everything go with the police?" "Fine. They got the woman who killed Lee Fletcher." "Oh, thank goodness. That must be such a relief for you." Uma gestured to the chair across from her desk, the same one where I'd sat hundreds of times over the past 4 years, getting assignments and performance reviews and occasional praise for jobs well done. "I was hoping we could talk about moving forward." I stayed standing. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk about yesterday." "Of course. What would you like to know?" "I'd like to know why you sent me to a property you knew was dangerous." Uma's smile flickered. "I'm sorry?" "Officer Howard told me what you said. About the Fletcher account being flagged by multiple departments. About previous incidents with threatening behavior. You knew it was a dangerous call, and you sent me anyway." "Don, I think you may have misunderstood. He also told me you claimed I'd been asking for more challenging assignments, that I specifically wanted to handle difficult customers." I pulled out the folded piece of paper I'd prepared that morning and placed it on her desk. "That's my resignation letter." Uma stared at the paper like it might bite her. Don, you're clearly still shaken by what happened. This isn't the time to make major life decisions. This is exactly the time. Yesterday showed me what happens when I trust this company to protect me. You walked into an extraordinary situation that no one could have predicted. You knew Lee Fletcher had made complaints about being stalked. You knew other technicians had reported problems at that property. You sent me there hoping something would happen. Uma's concerned expression cracked, showing something harder underneath. That's a very serious accusation. Maybe you didn't want me to get shot, but you were hoping I'd get scared enough to quit field work or maybe quit altogether. Get me off your roster without having to fire me. Don, you're being paranoid. I sent you to that property because I thought you could handle it professionally. No, you sent me because you thought I'd fail. Because you've been trying to push me out for months. I picked up my resignation letter and placed it directly in her hands. Well, congratulations. It worked. Uma scanned the letter quickly, her face cycling through surprise, anger, and what looked like panic. Don, be reasonable. You have 4 years invested here. Good benefits, job security. You can't throw that away because of one bad experience. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm walking away from people who see me as expendable. No one sees you as expendable. You're a valued employee. Valued employees don't get sent into dangerous situations without warning. Valued employees don't get told to handle their own attempted murder more professionally. Uma set the letter down and leaned back in her chair, and I saw her calculating something behind her eyes. All right, Don, what do you want? A transfer to desk work? A raise? Different territory? The offer should have tempted me. 6 months ago it would have, but yesterday had changed something fundamental about how I saw myself and what I was willing to accept. I want to work for people who won't sacrifice my safety for their convenience. That's not this place. Don, you're making a mistake. Jobs like this don't grow on trees, especially for someone without a college degree. You think you'll find something better out there? And there it was. The threat I'd been expecting. The reminder that I should be grateful for any employment at all, that someone like me couldn't afford to be picky about how I was treated. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I'd rather struggle working for honest people than get comfortable working for ones who'll throw me under the bus. Uma's mouth tightened. I hope you'll reconsider once you've had time to think clearly. This resignation requires 2 weeks' notice, so you'll have plenty of opportunity to change your mind. Actually, it doesn't. Pennsylvania is an at-will state. I can quit anytime, just like you can fire me anytime. I headed toward the door. I'll clean out my desk and be gone by lunch. I was halfway through packing my personal items when my phone rang. Bentley's name showed up on the screen. Mr. Robinson? Hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Actually, you're calling at the perfect time. I just quit my job. Really? Well, that's interesting timing. I was calling to ask if you might be interested in a different kind of work. I stopped packing and sat down at my desk. What kind of work? We've got an opening for a civilian investigator position, someone to help coordinate between different agencies on cases involving mental health issues, follow up on complaints that fall through the cracks, that kind of thing. It's not glamorous work, but it's important. I thought about Lee Fletcher's phone calls going nowhere, about Brenda escaping from a facility that waited 2 weeks to report her missing, about all the ways the system had failed, and how those failures had cost a man his life. What would that involve exactly? Think of it as being a professional problem solver, someone who knows how to dig into situations, ask the right questions, make sure things don't get buried in bureaucracy. Yesterday showed me you've got good instincts and you don't panic under pressure. Those are exactly the qualities we need. Through Uma's office window, I could see her on the phone, probably calling her supervisor to explain why she'd just lost an employee. She looked frustrated and angry, like someone whose careful plans had just fallen apart. The pay comparable to what I'm making now. Better, actually. Plus real benefits and people who won't send you into dangerous situations without backup. I looked around the office where I'd worked for 4 years, at the desk where I'd sat every morning dreading whatever Uma might assign me, at the window overlooking the parking lot where I'd stood yesterday morning, scared of disappointing her. When can I start? How about Monday? Give you the weekend to decompress. Monday sounds perfect. After I hung up, I finished packing my desk in about 10 minutes. 4 years of employment fit easily into one cardboard box. A coffee mug, some photos, a few personal supplies. It was strange how little I was leaving behind. Uma appeared beside my desk as I was carrying the box toward the exit. Don, I really wish you'd reconsider. This job market is brutal right now. Thanks for the concern, I said, not slowing down. But I think I'll be fine. I pushed through the front door and walked across the parking lot to my truck, the same route I'd taken yesterday morning when I'd driven out to the Fletcher property thinking it was just another service call. But everything was different now. I was different. Yesterday I'd been someone who swallowed his doubts and followed orders, even when those orders led him into danger. Today I was someone who demanded better. As I drove away from Pennsylvania Electric for the last time, I realized that as terrible as yesterday had been, it had also been the best thing that could have happened to me. It had shown me exactly who I was when everything went wrong, and exactly what I was worth. Turned out I was worth a lot more than I'd been settling for.